He snaps his fingers. Half the universe turns to dust. $1 trillion franchise, biggest supervillain in movie history. And somehow, the internet can't stop asking one question. Was Thanos actually right? Now picture this: Davos, Switzerland, 2020. No purple skin, no infinity gauntlet. Just an 85-year-old scientist who has spent 60 years studying chimpanzees, standing on stage at the World Economic Forum. And she says something that makes the internet freeze. If human population dropped back to what it was 500 years ago, most of the world's problems would simply disappear. Her name is Jane Goodall, and within days, screenshots of her speech were circulating next to comparisons to Thanos. Elon Musk himself responded online, calling the philosophy the death of humanity. So here's the question this video is going to answer. Did one of the most respected scientists on the planet just say the same thing as a genocidal comic book villain? And more importantly, using real data on food, population, and consumption, is either of them actually correct? Stick around, because the answer is more uncomfortable than you'd think. Thanos' philosophy wasn't invented in a writer's room out of nowhere. It's a direct descendant of a real 18th century theory from British economist Thomas Malthus. In 1798, Malthus argued that population grows exponentially while food production only grows linearly, meaning the two are on a collision course, and that collision gets resolved through famine, war, or disease. Thanos scales that idea up to the size of the cosmos. He believes his homeworld, Titan, collapsed because of unchecked population growth. Resources are finite. Reproduction is not. So in his mind, the only compassionate fix is to erase exactly half of all life, chosen completely at random, rich and poor alike. In his own telling, this isn't cruelty, it's balance. Inside the movie, this logic gets coded as evil the moment it leaves a villain's mouth. But here's the uncomfortable part. The reasoning Thanos is built on isn't fictional. It's a real argument that has been debated, defended, and debunked for over 2 centuries. Now let's get to the real question. The viral clip of Goodall was cut and stripped of context until it sounded like a call to eliminate half the human race. What she actually said is a lot more nuanced. For decades, going back to a 2003 report and speeches in 2007 and 2009, Goodall has argued that unchecked human population growth sits underneath most environmental problems. In that Davos speech, after listing deforestation, poverty, unsustainable lifestyles, and corruption, she adds one line. Most of these problems wouldn't exist if the population were still at the size it was 500 years ago. Turning that into a call for mass death is a serious distortion. Goodall's proposed solution isn't violence or forced control. It's education. In a 2019 message to the Population Matters conference, she called unlimited economic growth on a finite planet absurd. But the fix she pointed to was empowering women and girls because, as she put it, family size drops wherever women's education improves. So here's the critical difference between Thanos and Goodall. Thanos offers a sudden, forced, lethal outcome. Goodall offers a slow, voluntary, root cause solution. One erases the right to live, the other tries to improve the quality of the lives already here. But does that mean the underlying diagnosis, that Earth can't support this many people, is actually true? That's the question worth digging into. Malthus's thesis was simple. Population grows exponentially, food grows linearly. History has not been kind to that claim. Between 1961 and 2020, world population grew 2.5 times over, but food production grew 3.7 times over. Per capita food production in 2020 was 47% higher than it was in 1961. Malthus never saw the Green Revolution coming. Fertilizer, irrigation, crop science, and mechanization made food production grow exponentially too. Right alongside population, not behind it. Look at just the last 30 years and the pattern holds. Between 1990 and 2019, world population rose 45%. Global food calorie production rose 61%. Food production isn't losing the race, it's winning it. Which raises an obvious question. If food production is outpacing population, why are hundreds of millions of people still hungry? As of 2024, roughly 800 million people worldwide still lack access to enough food for a healthy, active life. That's not a production problem, that's a distribution problem. The planet produces enough calories to feed everyone. But war, trade policy, infrastructure gaps, and economic inequality keep that food from reaching the people who need it. And that's exactly where Thanos' math falls apart. Fine, the last 60 years worked out, but Thanos and Goodall aren't really arguing about the past. They're arguing about where this is headed. So let's look forward instead of backward. The UN currently projects world population will climb to somewhere between 9.7 and 10.8 billion by 2050, before likely peaking around the mid-2080s at roughly 10.3 billion. That sounds like exactly the kind of runaway growth Malthus warned about. But agricultural economists have already run the numbers on the food side too. Under a medium growth scenario, global agriculture would need to produce about 47% more crop calories than it did in 2011 to comfortably feed 9.75 billion people. Even under the high growth scenario, 10.8 billion people. The required increase is 61%. And that's not a hypothetical ceiling. It's roughly the same rate of growth food production has already matched or beaten over the last 3 decades. A peer-reviewed analysis published in the journal Elementa went even further, modeling whether current global crop production could feed a 2050 population of 9.7 billion. The conclusion, yes. Current production levels are already sufficient to meet humanity's nutritional needs at that population size, provided food waste is reduced and diets shift moderately. In other words, the ceiling Thanos and Malthus both assume we're about to smash through isn't actually there. It's a projection built on trends that have consistently underestimated human agricultural capacity for 200 years running. None of this means growth is risk-free or that food gets to everyone automatically. We've already covered why distribution, not scarcity, is the real bottleneck. But it does mean the core premise behind we need fewer people to survive doesn't hold up when you actually run the math forward instead of assuming collapse. Thanos' snap erases people at random, equal parts rich and poor. But think about what that actually does. If the real problem is distribution, not quantity, then cutting the population in half doesn't fix distribution at all. The wealthy half still consumes the majority of resources. The poor half is still left short. The ratio stays exactly the same. Only the raw numbers shrink. In the real world, consumption inequality dwarfs population size as a driver of resource strain. The wealthiest 10% of people on Earth are responsible for over half of global carbon emissions. The question was never really how many people exist, it's who is consuming what. Erasing people at random does nothing to touch that imbalance. And here's the irony. Thanos had a gauntlet powerful enough to double every resource in the universe or redistribute them perfectly. Instead, he chose the laziest possible fix: deletion. Academic critiques of the film have zeroed in on exactly this flaw. Both Malthus and Thanos start from the false assumption that everyone consumes the same amount and leaves the same environmental footprint. Reality looks nothing like that. This isn't the first time someone predicted mass die-off from overpopulation. In 1968, biologist Paul Ehrlich published The Population Bomb, predicting that hundreds of millions would starve to death in the 1970s and 80s because the planet simply couldn't keep up. 50 plus years later, world population has more than doubled, and per capita food production didn't collapse. It rose. Extreme poverty fell to the lowest levels in recorded history. The pattern keeps repeating because Malthusian logic keeps making the same mistake. It underestimates human adaptability, technological innovation, and the way markets respond to scarcity by producing more of what's scarce. Thanos' universe has the exact same blind spot. A being with literally unlimited power looks at scarcity and picks fewer people over more resources or smarter distribution. The most destructive option available, dressed up as the most rational one. This is where the story needs balance, not a clean villain versus hero ending. Goodall's pointing at something real. Earth's resources are not infinite. Humanity currently consumes the equivalent of about 1.5 Earths worth of resources every year. Vertebrate populations in tropical regions have dropped by as much as 60% since 1970. That's not a number anyone should wave away. But there's a crucial distinction between overconsumption and overpopulation. And Goodall herself blends the two, naming unsustainable lifestyles and corruption in the same breath as population growth. The real issue isn't just how many of us there are, it's how we live. Some researchers have warned that blaming climate breakdown primarily on population growth risks shifting responsibility away from industrialized nations, the biggest consumers, and onto developing countries with higher birth rates, which are often the ones least responsible for the crisis. Population, in other words, can become a convenient scapegoat that lets the real driver, unequal consumption, off the hook. So back to the original question. Is Jane Goodall saying the same thing as Thanos? Partly, yes. Both start from the premise that unlimited population growth on a finite planet is unsustainable. Both are willing to say out loud that something has to change. But mostly, no. Thanos proposes an instant, forced, lethal solution. Goodall proposes a gradual, voluntary transformation through education and equity. One denies the right to exist. The other is trying to improve the lives that already exist. And the data gives us a clear answer to the darker version of the question. Does half of humanity need to disappear? No, because this was never a production shortfall. For 60 straight years, food production has grown faster than population. What we're facing is a distribution and consumption crisis, not a headcount crisis. Cutting the population in half without fixing how resources are shared wouldn't solve the problem. It would just shrink it down to a smaller, equally unequal version of itself. Thanos' real tragedy is that a being with godlike power never even considered the most obvious solution, creating abundance or sharing what already exists. He chose to erase instead of imagine. Maybe the actual villain was never scarcity. Maybe it was a total failure of imagination. So what do you think? Is the real threat how many of us there are, or how we choose to consume? Drop your take in the comments.